In this lesson, we're going to discuss variables.
Okay.
So I guess the first thing we need to talk about is what exactly is a variable?
I'm rather curious.
Well, a variable is simply a way of storing data and then being able to refer to it later by a convenient name.
Oh, I see. Such as having a string of text or numbers being condensed down into maybe a single word?
Right, a variable is almost, you can almost view it like a variable is a box that you can put things into, like data, like a text or a number.
Ah, I gotcha.
And then the convenient part about that is later, just by, you can grab that box, open it up, and get the data back out.
Anytime you want. Okay, that's cool.
So, in PHP syntax, how do we define variables? Well, we define a variable by starting with a $sign and then giving a text name for the variable.
Ah, I gotcha.
So, for example, let's create the variable foo.
Foo.
Now, in PHP, variables are created on the fly, meaning you simply assign a variable, and if it does not already exist, it gets created.
I gotcha.
So, if we were to assign the value 5 to it, we would say $foo equals 5, and give a terminator.
All right.
So, what that simply does is say the variable 5, or that 5 is stored in the variable foo.
So, if you ran that right now...
Actually, let's try that. Let's save it out. We'll call this var.php.
And so, in theory, you should have the number 5 pop up when you run this, correct?
You might think so.
Right.
But in actuality,
we get nothing. Now, why is that?
That's because 5 was in fact stored.
Okay.
But it's just stored. It's put in a box. It's not shown. It is not output, and therefore it is not seen in a browser.
So it's still in the closet.
Right. Basically, if you were to somehow look into the hardware on your server and find this one tiny piece of memory, you might find it.
All right.
If you're someone with a web browser, it was never even sent.
I gotcha. Okay.
It was stored but never used.
All right. So how are we going to make that visible?
Well, if we wanted to output it, we use what we use to output pretty much anything else. Echo.
I see. Okay.
Now, instead of giving it text like we did in previous examples, we're going to tell it to echo $foo. See, we're referring to the variable.
See. So instead of saying the 5, you say foo, because foo is representing 5.
So let's see what happens when we try to echo out foo. Well, instead of printing out $foo, instead it went and it opened that box, got the data out, and output that instead.
Oh, wow. That is pretty handy, actually. So
that's basic usage. Once again, variables are created on the fly. They don't have to be defined ahead of time.
Okay.
And the way assignment works is, let's see. Let's actually take a look at that. What happens if you were to reassign a variable?
Okay.
So let's say $foo equals 5, and then later in time we say $foo equals hello. So what happens now?
Right.
Echo $foo. Now I'm going to do one thing here just to make this a little bit more clear.
Okay.
Right after the first one, I'm going to insert one more echo statement, and I'm going to echo out an HTML line break tag.
Okay.
So
essentially, the line break is just going to make a line right under it, correct?
Right. That's going to add a new line in the a new line we can see in the web browser.
Okay.
Which will make some of the results more clear here.
Hence the name line break. And there
so
you go.
So you see 5 and hello. So we see how when you reassign a variable, you could say that variable is completely rewritten, even though it contained 5 in the past.
Right.
The moment we reassign it, anything that it was completely dropped.
Ah, I see.
Otherwise, because I mean, it doesn't say 5 hello. 5 was completely replaced.
I see what you're saying. Okay.
So
now every time you type in echo foo, though, it'll always print out a hello. It won't print out.
Right. If we were, let's grab another line break. And then let's grab foo and echo it again.
And just be 5 hello hello, and every single time after that it'll just keep saying hello. Exactly. Okay.
So that is how we assign and work with variables. Now let's see how variables work and work with quotes.
Okay.
We'll revisit quotes for just a minute, like we did in the strings lesson, just to get a few things out of the way. What happens if a variable appears in quotes?
Okay.
For example, something like this, or even something more complicated, like let's say some text and foo.
Okay.
Now you can see that the actual text is in the color indicating this is part of a string. But we see something interesting. The syntax highlighter has picked up on $foo and actually left it that purple color as though it's a variable.
Right.
So let's see what this outputs. some text in.
And 5.
That means that variable was actually evaluated. It went and got the data out of the variable and used the data instead.
Because it knows that foo is representing the 5. So
which is interesting. Even though it's inside a string, that meant somehow foo was able to kind of break out and be evaluated anyway.
I gotcha. Okay.
Now, furthering our look into how quotes work with variables, let's take a look and see if single quote, or how single quote behaves.
Okay.
Notice that even the syntax highlighter thinks that it's been taken out.
It has changed color to the gray.
And now we're literally printing out $foo.
I see. Okay.
So that's another consideration to keep in mind when using quotes. Depending on the type of quote you choose, will alter the behavior of the actual variable.
I see. So that's something you might want to keep in mind for future.
Right. If you meant 5 to appear, you wonder why you're just getting your variable name. Check what type of quotes are being used.
I gotcha.
The last thing I want to show with quotes is, let's say you were using double quotes for whatever reason. Maybe you were working extensively with break characters or something.
Right.
What happens if you really did want to echo out $foo? You could escape the $sign, just like we were using in the strings lesson when we were using the escape character to represent a quote or even a new line.
I gotcha.
If you use $$, that will escape that $sign. And actually, this is one case where we're getting a little bit ahead of the syntax highlighter.
I see.
You can see here that it's still leaving it the variable color. But let's see what PHP really thinks about this. It's keeping the
there's no noticeable difference, but he did update it.
But yeah, so if I was to do this instead, let's see. So double quotes and an unescaped $foo gives 5.
There you go, 5.
Let's say we really did want to literally say $foo. We can simply escape the $sign, and there we go.
There you go.
Cool. So this would allow us to do interesting things like this. So we could say $foo is $foo. But because one is escaped and one is not, we get
$foo is 5. Wow.
So just something to keep in mind when working with quotes.
I gotcha.
Now, let's talk about what types of things can be stored in variables. So far we've seen just a number, storing the number 5. What else can be stored in variables?
I'm assuming you could also use text and numbers and.
Well, okay. There are 4 scalar data types that we can store in PHP. They are the Boolean type for storing true or false. It's just a simple on/off value.
Right.
We have integer for storing whole numbers.
Okay.
We have float for storing decimal numbers, and basically any number that contains a decimal point.
I gotcha.
And we have strings.
Okay.
And we were like strings, meaning what we were working with, things like this, like text and anything encapsulated in quotes.
Right.
So let's set up an example of the different data types we can store. So let's say that $A equals true, and that's going to be a Boolean. And let's say $B equals 5, and that's going to be an integer. We'll say that $C is going to be 5.2, and that is going to be a float. We'll say that $B is going to equal some text. We'll say $B is going to be a string.
Okay.
It's going to say weasels.
Weasels.
Let me align my quote just a little bit for ease of readability. Good old white space. So this is a string.
I see.
So we have 4 different data types.
Okay.
Now let's set up a scenario where we can display our data types.
Okay.
And of course we'll use what we've used up till now, and that is echo. So let's echo $A. And I'm going to put an HTML line break in between each of these for readability. So we'll say echo ABR. Like such. And now we'll copy that and speed the process a little bit.
There you go.
So we want to echo $A, $B, $C, and $D.
And it should be noted that that's a good way. Just keep your stuff clean while you're doing this.
Oh yeah.
So you go back and just read it really quick.
Most definitely.
Yeah.
And hey, time to debug some stuff. So we were unhappy about line 7.
Line 7.
And so 7. Didn't terminate.
The weasels. See? Weasels will get you every time.
Undefined variable D. It's redefined $B.
Ah, I see.
All right, so here's our output. So,
well, just before you go on, what just happened there? Just
the parse error?
Yes.
What that was is I had redefined this, or this is what I had written. I had defined $B, set it to 5, but then I reassigned it to say weasels.
Oh, I see.
Later in code, I did put D. D did not exist. That'd be typing like $new name.
Ah, I see.
Same thing.
So it just confused it, and it's like, I don't see a D, man.
So we've typed a variable name that doesn't exist. The current error level we have set in our PHP versions is set to show notices. These are some of those error levels I was talking about before.
Okay.
Notices is saying that this isn't an error. It doesn't present a problem for our code's execution, but it's something we might want to be aware of, and that is the variable name new name doesn't exist.
I gotcha. So it was just letting you know.
Yeah.
It's like, I'll do it, but, I'm just telling you.
Exactly.
Okay. I gotcha.
So, all right, we have all of our variables properly represented, which outputs this.
All right. 1.5, 5.2, and weasels.
That's a little interesting, though. The last three make sense, but the first one, this is our Boolean.
Right.
We had set this to true, but we get the value 1.
Right.
Now, all the others seem fine. We have the integer 5. That's fine. We have the float 5.2, worked just fine, and the string weasels.
Okay. So how come you get a 1 when you're supposed to, be a true?
Well, we need to talk a little bit about some of the automatic conversions that take place with certain data types. What's happening in PHP is you do not explicitly say what type of data is going to be stored in a variable. You can see we had A is one type, B is another type. I commented which type we're working with, but nothing in the actual PHP code is saying that A can only contain booleans.
I gotcha.
And you saw earlier when we said that $foo was equal to 5 and later was equal to some hello, we actually changed the type of data that it contained.
Right.
So there's no rigid restriction on what types they can contain.
Okay, I gotcha.
What this means, though, is that when something is expecting to work on a data type and it gets something that it was not expecting, an automatic conversion will occur.
Okay.
Let's take the first echo, for example.
Right.
Echo is meant to take in a string. That's what you output is a string. Now, in our case, the first one, we're echoing a Boolean. Okay. So an automatic internal conversion takes place where the Boolean value is converted into a string.
I see.
But the way a Boolean value converts is such that true is equal to 1. So let's see what false is equal to.
And false, well, if you just look at this, it should be a 0.
But it's not.
But it's not. Where'd it go?
The internal conversion works like this. If you're converting a Boolean to a string, then true would equal 1, and false would equal a blank string. Basically, false would equal that bit.
I gotcha. It would be a truly nothing. That makes sense.
And that brings us into the last thing we need to look at for the variables lesson. Is let's say you're debugging some code and you need to see exactly what's going on with certain variables. And you can see echo works good for the most part, but if automatic conversion can take place, and sometimes make things a little bit more confusing.
Okay.
Let's take a look at PHP's var dump function.
Okay. Var dump. What is that?
Var dump is a function that will give you information about a variable.
Okay.
And syntax is var underscore dump. And because this is a standard function as opposed to a language construct like echo, we will have to include the parentheses. Basically, this is a function. We need to feed it information, which also known as an argument. And arguments are placed within parentheses.
Okay. All right. I gotcha.
So we're going to var dump A, and instead of just echo it. So if we run this now, we can see that that is a Boolean value, and that the actual value stored within is false.
Oh, wow, that's pretty cool.
Let's add that to the rest of the values and see what those look like. So var dump, and add parentheses. Like so. Now, let's have a look.
Oh, wow.
So we see that the second one was in fact an integer containing 5.
Of course, there's a float.
Float, 5.2, and a string.
Well, now why does it say a 7 right there?
That's saying how many characters long this string is.
Oh, I gotcha.
Meaning Weasels has 7 characters in it.
Okay. Well, that makes
sense.
So
that can be very handy if you need to debug and you need to see exactly what's going on with a certain value.
Okay.
So with that, really, that's going to wrap up our discussion on variables. We went through and we covered the basics. What is a variable? How do we use them? How do we access the name? Basically putting data in a box and accessing it later. We took a look at how variables are used with in various cases with echo and var_dump. We took a look at what we need to do to properly use variables within a string. So we could actually have a string of text and immediately dump in a variable and how that's evaluated. We took a look at the different data types that we can store within variables, as well as discuss some of the automatic conversions that may take place depending on how we actually use the variable. And finally, we looked at how we can use var_dump to get some useful debug information about variables and what they contain.
Okay.
So with that, that's going to wrap up the lesson.
All right.